All right, I want to do another course for you now and put together another playlist. So this is the introduction to the Articles of Faith playlist. What we're going to do is talk about each of the Articles of Faith over the next several months. I'm going to release one. I think what I'm going to do is one a month of the Articles of Faith. Send out another video about these and talk about each of these articles. These are really crucial to understand. Especially to understand the LDS Church and their teachings and ideas. So we're going to cover each of these. The Articles of Faith is a very unique document, or important document might be a better way to say it, in understanding LDS ideas and philosophies. So I have tried to study and understand the Articles of Faith myself. Wouldn't say that I'm completely know everything there is to know about them. I'm still studying and learning, but I wanted to cue you in on some of the things that I have learned through studying the Articles of Faith. On my mission president gave me a challenge to memorize the Articles of Faith and gave me an idea of how to do it. In fact, I think I have that for one of our scripture challenges coming up. So stay tuned for that one. And I did it and memorized the Articles of Faith, and am still continuing to keep that up so I can continually make sure that I remember the Articles of Faith and be able to use those. It's very important to understand those Articles of Faith, because the more you memorize them and understand what each Article of Faith is, then the more you see them in scriptures. In fact, one of the sets of tags I have in the Gospel Library is I have a tag for each Article of Faith. So as I'm reading the scriptures, then I will find scriptures that actually talk about each article of faith. So they exemplify or discuss the principles in one of those articles of faith. So I'll tag it. And what's cool about that is I can go back and hit that tag and be able to actually see all the scriptures that I've identified throughout all the standard works that actually talk about that specific article of faith. So a lot of good stuff that's in there. Now, if you're not a member of the LDS Church, then you may find this quite an interesting perspective in understanding LDS philosophy and idea by understanding the Articles of Faith. So to give some background on the Articles of Faith, and I know the church has more information on their website about this. There was a gentleman that was a reporter, if I remember correctly, that he asked Joseph Smith to write a letter to him, basically to teach him and help understand the tenets of the LDS Church, the tenets of this religion and what is it about and things. So that's what Joseph did, is he wrote this letter. It's known as the Wentworth Letter, if I remember correctly. And this guy had later actually published these principles in the newspaper to talk about and just educate people on what do the Mormons believe, basically. So this letter became pretty famous in this instance and is a part of church history now. In this letter, Joseph Smith concisely put down 13 tenets. Some would argue there's a 14th, and that's a whole other debate about we believe in meetings. He put in there the 13 tenets of our religion and our faith. And I have to admit, the more I study these, the more I understand these articles of faith, the more I believe that they are 100% inspired. I mean, really, it's amazing when you think about how these come together and how they are utilized. And, in a way, they're near perfect. I mean, it's amazing. It's like one of those revelations that Joseph Smith gave us, basically, like the book of Moses, most likely the book of Abraham, Joseph Smith, Matthew, which is fascinating. We have a gospel discussion, a summary on the Pearl of Great Price. You should go watch that. It's a really good one, since the Articles of Faith are included in the Pearl of Great Price as some of the things that were revealed through Joseph Smith, some of the revelations that he got. So this, I believe, is just as inspired. The Articles of Faith are just as inspired as all the other things that Joseph Smith has given us. So a lot of good information in them when you really think about it. I really believe the average member does not really fully appreciate these articles of faith. We take them for granted too much. So I want to put this course together to discuss them. Now, a couple of observations that I've had about the articles of faith that I want to talk about and share with you right now are really important, because I want to talk about them as a whole. I'm going to do a video on each article of faith to talk about. And if I did them all at once, this is going to be a very long video. So I'm going to break those into actual smaller videos for each article of faith. But just in a conceptual standpoint, to talk about the articles of faith as a whole for this video. It's really interesting that there's 13 articles of faith, and you can go into the numerology of 13 or look at the numerology of each number 1 through 13 and how does that correlate with each article of faith. There are some things you might be able to extrapolate, some other ideas that you can get from that. I just have found a couple things that are really fascinating as to how these are organized that I don't think is a coincidence. So in a discipline that I studied many years ago called Neuro-Linguistic Programming, or NLP, it's a kind of an advanced psychology, if you will. It's a discipline, a way of thinking and understanding how the brain works. So we think of the brain similar to a computer system, and that there's inputs and outputs and things, and then programming. And how you've programmed your brain is what determines your beliefs, how you act with the world, those kinds of things. So one of the structures that we use, one of the frameworks, if you will, in NLP is a thing called the hierarchy, not hierarchy of needs, sorry, that was Maslow. Maslow has this hierarchy of needs that Abraham Maslow's put out that talks about there's basic needs of survival, food, water, shelter kind of stuff, and then there's security, and then it kind of goes up to more of a self-actualization at the pinnacle of that, where you have time to really understand who you are in the grand universe of everything. So this Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs does have a bit of a structure behind that is very similar to what we have in neuro-linguistic programming, in that we start with these concepts down at the bottom that are more just basic animal instincts, outer experience, behaviors, those kinds of things. And as you go up this hierarchy of needs, it becomes more and more centered to you. So instead of just dealing with food and survival at the very basic part of the needs, as you get to more of the central core parts of those needs, it's about self-actualization. It's about understanding myself, my person in relation with the greater universe, with God, and those kinds of things. So in NLP, we have what's called the neurological levels of alignment, and they follow a very similar pattern to what Abraham Maslow has as far as the underlying structure. So in the neurological levels, we start off in a very basic formation of behaviors and actions, and then as the neurological levels go up, we get more into beliefs and identity structures and self-actualization type things as well. So they follow a similar structure that they're based upon, basically, that there's layers of human existence, starting from an inner core, and then there's layers that go out from there and eventually extend to how we interface with the actual world around us, basically. So this is a foundational structure that's important, that has a lot of application when you think of psychology and things like that. So one day I got thinking about this, and I thought, could this actually fit with the articles of faith? So I started looking at it thinking, are the articles of faith following a similar structure, underlying structure at least, in that we start with a core belief, core understanding of who we are in relation to the universe and God and things like that, and then they slowly go out to where we get to more of just actions, behaviors, and how we deal with the world. And what I found when I looked at that was, yes, the articles of faith actually follow this process and pattern the same. It's really fascinating. So if you look at it, if this is kind of confusing, pull out a copy of the articles of faith, or pull them up in the app, look at the end of the Pearl of Great Price, and look at these. The first article of faith is our belief in God, basically, and it states our relationship with him as he is our Father. So we get a sense of how we relate with the grander universe or the greater good of everything else by relaying with God. And then the beliefs kind of go more and more out from there, basically, to where the 13th of Article of Faith is all about behavior, basically, and how we relate with each other and the rest of the world. So it really follows a structure of how they're organized that fits. Is really just a fascinating idea that I was surprised to understand a little bit more about. And so that's a really cool thing that got me thinking about, are the Articles of Faith organized in a specific pattern? Like, is number one the first one for a reason, and so on and so forth? And I really believe they are. It's fascinating when you really look at that we start with our core beliefs of God, then we start believing about things that are about ourselves and our identities and ideas, dealing with our sins and how we overcome challenges and things like that. Then it gets into dealing with how do we help other people and how do we do more stuff with the church and organization and things. And so there is some structure there. It's not perfect, completely perfect, and lines up. It doesn't line up with Maslow's hierarchy of needs or the NLP, neurological levels of alignment. It's not perfect, but it shows that there's an underlying structure of there's different layers of our person, basically. We start with the core belief of our self and how we relate to the infinite, and then more beliefs about ourselves, and then more about our actions and thoughts and belief structures, behaviors at the very end, basically, all the way out there. So the Articles of Faith do follow that pattern, which is really cool. So cool to look at. Then, the more I got looking into it, I realized that there's another organization to the Articles of Faith. And I thought this was completely fascinating to understand as well. You can actually lump the Articles of Faith, categorize these into a few different categories. There's actually there's 4 categories that I've been able to identify that go along with these. So if you want to follow along, you can with these. So I found that they're organized, and here's the structure that I was able to put together. So Article of Faith number 1, 2, 3, and 4 could be put in a category of core beliefs of the church. Okay? So Article of Faith 1, 2, 3, and 4 can be considered a category. You can put a box around those 4 and consider those core beliefs of the church. Okay? Now, the next category of them is more about organization of the church. So you've got your core beliefs, the first 4, then you've got organization. That is 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So there's 5 of them. The next 5 basically are about the organization of the church, okay? So if you read through those, if you read through 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, that's there. We can see that organizational pattern. Now, what's fascinating about each of these is they build upon each other, okay? If you don't understand the first Article of Faith, the second one is not going to make sense. And the second one is there to actually help you understand the third. And without the third, the fourth one doesn't make any sense. So if you notice, each Article of Faith builds upon the other as you go through. So you can read them. That kind of goes back to the idea of the neurological levels, basically, of each one builds upon the next all the way through, all the way down to 13. And then this is a category you can classify these in. So 10 is the next Article of Faith in the categories. 10, Article of Faith number 10 is in a category by itself. This is a category all its own. And number 10, Article of Faith number 10, is basically the results, the culmination of the first 9. So if you take the first 4, which is your core beliefs, then you add the organization of the church, which is Articles of Faith 5 through 9, the next 5. If you add up all 9 of those, the results of putting all that into practice, into play, is number 10. They all add up to help accomplish number 10. If you want to read these, go for it. Go through and read each Article of Faith. It'll be awesome to just read them and understand this. I think you might find this pretty interesting too. But it culminates in number 10. All the previous 9 culminate to the realization, which is number 10. Now, after number 10, the Articles of Faith do take a turn. They change and go into somewhat of a different direction. So the first 10 kind of build up to each other to number 10. Then you have 11 and 12 and 13, which is different. They have a little bit of different feel to them. So they're in a category all their own. 11, 12, and 13 are in the category of how do we relate with the world. So 11, 12, and 13 is our instructions of how do we relate in this world. So it's where it's the rubber meets the road. It's not the forward-looking, here's how everything's going to turn out, which is number 10. 11, 12, and 13 are all about here are our guidelines and rules to help us to deal with everyday life, to deal with the stuff that's happening as we take the first 9 and apply them and work on getting to 10. So 11, 12, and 13 are about how do we handle daily life, how do we handle the things that are going on in our lives since we are living in a mortal sphere, a worldly sphere that has sin and challenges. 11, 12, and 13 are there to help us to put that in perspective. Here's the rules, here's the framework to use to understand this life that will help you as you apply the first 9 to get to number 10. So these articles of faith can be categorized, and this is a categorization that I've seen. If I'd recommend taking the time, go through the articles of faith and think of them in these categories and see what you think. I'd love to get your comments on this to see do you agree with this? Do you see that pattern and those trends working out the way that I've talked about? If you have, I'd love to hear it. If you don't see that, or you maybe see other patterns and trends, leave it in the comments. I'd love to hear more feedback from you as well. We want to make this a discussion. And then over the next several months, I'm going to release videos talking about each individual article of faith. We're going to go in a little bit more depth on each article of faith. So hopefully this will help you to understand each article of faith better, and especially if you're not a member of the church, at least give you more insight and understanding what does the LDS Church really believe and how do these articles of faith really teach and be the foundation of the gospel. So I look forward